Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Allison Briscoe-Smith, and I'm really excited to be part of this conversation and welcome you to this conversation. I've been asked not to do introductions, which feels foreign to me, but my assumption is that you all can look us up, or that the wonderful panelists that we have here, and perhaps we're also going to be joined by another panelist, will speak to their expertise and to their experiences as well. But I wanted to kind of frame and begin and open this kind of conversation that we're bringing this conversation to really focus in on the reasons why and the mechanisms by which we can foster and cultivate belonging. And in terms of the reasons why, it doesn't really take very long for us to kind of pay attention to what our kids are experiencing or seeing in the world today. That we have children who are experiencing incredible rates of violence, oppression, isolation, and also experiencing that within their hands, holding on to and actually witnessing and repeatedly seeing violence. And that this is something that I, as a child psychologist, that those of us as folks that care and love for children are deeply concerned about and find deeply impactful, that the speed with which children are seeing and witnessing terrible things, the ways in which they're impacted is super present. So we want to be able to pay attention to what are our opportunities for resilience, for strength, for survival in the midst of that. And I'm really blessed to be part of this kind of community here who's really paid attention to the research, what kids want, what kids need in order to feel like they actually belong and actually feel like they can manage in this very challenging world. So I'm going to turn to our panelists, and Akimi, we'll start with you. I'm wondering if you could tell us just a little bit about why you think belonging is really important and how it shows up in the work that you do at Sesame.
Would love to. I'm going to hopefully know how to turn this on. If not, is it? Okay, well, that helps. Okay, so let me begin with another part of the question, if I might, right? So part A of the question for us at Sesame Workshop. Belonging begins with a healthy and positive self-identity. And we know the power that comes from us owning our identity and feeling great about that. And we insert at Sesame, we insert that critical word healthy into it because positive for positive alone doesn't benefit you. Right? So if I'm feeling healthy about my identity, then I accept that you have to feel healthy about your identity. From that part, it leads to our that notion of confidence and an ability to have optimism about the future leads to this concept of group identity. And those group identities are multiple. I am a child of a person. This person is composed of a family, all of these different identities. And so Sesame, knowing that and being very child-centered, asked the next critical question, right? Then what happens when some of those identities aren't valued out there in the world? So we don't necessarily need to even factor in all the horrific horrors, please let's fix them, that happen at a societal level. We just know that some groups are valued, and we feel that as children, and some groups are not as valued, and that devaluation we own. And for many, many groups, it's a generational effect. So for us to even get to what's a healthy sense of belonging, we need that group identity to be intact. And then I can feel good about my community. But if I go in understanding that parts of my group identity are devalued, then why have a sense of belonging? And we can see the effects in terms of children not having a positive sense of this unworthiness, right? And we can also understand why they may give up on themselves, which is nothing is more tragic than a 4-year-old giving up on themselves, right? So why belonging is important? Because that's the final component. It means that some of these other things have been put into place, and therefore I can see connection, I can see membership, and something in the social ecological system is working, even if those forces aren't out there positively for me as part of a group. So long-winded way to say, why is belonging important? It means those other two things are there, right? And somebody's attending to them. And so there's a particular way in which it feels hard, it feels striking. but can we just cue up the video to think about and just celebrate how simple fostering a healthy sense of a self can be? So let's just play a little. I think it's a minute.
My eyes are brown, and your eyes are blue. But there is no difference. I'm still the same as you. I am proud, and you should be too. There is no difference. Elmo has feelings like you. I am, you are, we are somebody. I am, you are, we are somebody. Like a giant, I'm tall, standing taller. I'm strong, I'm stronger. I'm beautiful, you know. I am somebody, and I will stand up. Elmo will speak up. I'm beautiful, you know. Elmo's beautiful, you know. I can be anything, yeah. I can do anything, yeah. I am strong in my skin, yeah.
I know, you want to sing along.
It's okay to move and dance. As you show there, it's such a beautiful opportunity to think about fostering belonging. You've articulated so well why it is that they need it, why kids need it, and again, this amazing kind of opportunity. We're gonna move to our next panelist as well, and we'll get an opportunity to put up another video that we can kind of see a little bit about the kind of needs around this work and why this work, again, is really important before we get a chance to hear from the panelists. So if we could go ahead and cue up our next video, we'll tell you a little bit about kind of taking this idea of belonging, again, a little bit further. Thank you.
This research has been the most impactful research that we've ever worked on.
We present research all the time. With this research, I've had to fight back my own tears because it's personal. It was just weeks after the murder of Ahmaud Arbery, and as we talked about the experiences of Ahmaud, we had a shared sense of frustration.
It was so painful for me to listen to Makeda talk about her experiences raising her family and all the instances of racism that she has to experience on a day-to-day basis. And here I was raising my own children, and I never had to deal with these situations.
We often say, don't just talk about it, be about it. And we decided that we were going to be about it in the most impactful way and do research in order to create effective change.
As we were hearing all these stories and their experiences of racism, I get a call from Makeda that just revealed what's so broken in our society and how much there is to fix.
I had an experience with my daughter. She began to really understand more details about segregation and racism. And she said to me, I have an idea. She pulls out a sheet of white paper and proceeds to cut strips of the paper and show me how she can tape them to her arm.
And then it will be on your hands, so they might think that you have white skin.
And then she turns to me and says,
Because if the world comes like that again, we know exactly what to do. Right, Mom?
if that ever happens again, we know exactly what to do, right, Mom? And that was gut-wrenching. I didn't have a response. It was as if someone kicked me in my heart, because here I am looking at my baby girl, who I think is so beautiful and I value her so much, and yet she thinks that in order to be valued in this society, she has to change the color of her skin. The fact that she thinks the onus is on her to change who she is to be accepted is simply not acceptable to me, and that's why I do the work that I do.
One thing that I found really interesting in our research was that white families are twice as likely to use color-evasive statements, such as "we don't see color," than black families. Even though white families often have good intentions with this approach, it ignores part of someone's identity rather than celebrating it. One of the best things about this research is that we get to use it to inspire content creators who have the ability to counter racial stereotypes and to create empowering portrayals of people of color.
We have a big opportunity to change the narrative to allow all children to see themselves as heroes in stories.
The onus is on white families as well to have these conversations because we need to prepare our kids to be allies for their friends of color.
This Discussing Race with Young Children guide is a non-judgmental, age-appropriate way to engage parents and caregivers in discussions about topics that can be quite difficult. When I think about my aspirations for this work and the future, my goal is we use these insights to inspire content creators to help all people value all people.
We're so thankful to our partners at Noggin and Sparkler Learning for publishing this guide.
We encourage you to check out this resource at bigheartworld.org/discussingrace.
I could see, and I want to encourage folks, I am a Berkeley trained therapist, please remember to breathe. Pay attention. I could see people's faces as they heard these stories and perhaps resonated with these stories. So we've got, again, the wonderful opportunity to hear from our panelists as to the research that went into this amazing tool. We'll hear from them and get a chance to also hear from our other panelists as well. So why don't we start off with Makeda and Colleen.
Thank you for encouraging us to take that moment to breathe, because I get choked up every time I watched that video, and as you can see, this work is so deeply personal, it's so real, it's so raw. And before I tell you about the research, I just want to touch on that experience, because a couple of people have said, like, oh my gosh, like, did you reenact that? And like, no, I didn't reenact it. Like, she said, oh, I have a great idea. And so I naturally grabbed my phone, right, as moms do, and you're like, let me see what this great idea is. And then that happened. And what do you say? What do you say when you have this child who you think is beautiful looking at you, thinking that this is the answer, that the onus is on her to change who she is and how she looks because she feels like that's the solution? The first person I called was Colleen, and we are just so deeply embedded in this work. And so I just want to extend gratitude to you, Colleen, to Dr. Michael Levine, who has been such an incredible partner in this work, Darryl, all of you here, Julia. So that's the personal piece. On the professional side, we began this research back in 2019, and I always like to frame that because it was before the murder of George Floyd. It was before some of these topics were, quote unquote, trending. We recognized the changing demographics in this country and wanted to do a deeply thoughtful study on race, identity, and the American family. And so we started with what we call now Shades of Us, studying 15,000 kids and families across the country, representing various social and political demography. And in addition to a survey, we had the quantitative component, but we also had these deep, intensive, qualitative interviews. So parents and kids and also friendship pairs to understand how they understood themselves, how they identified with others, how they engaged. And the insights were really profound. Just to share 3 quick takeaways. 1, we asked where kids learn stereotypes. Does anyone want to take a guess? The number 1 place they learn stereotypes? At school. At school. I heard someone over here say at school. Yes, at school was number 1. Number 2, in movies and on TV, right? So insight number 1. And this is in no respective order. But the second piece I want to share is with regard to casting. We asked kids, thinking about the the movies and shows you watch on TV, how would you expect to cast kids? 52% of kids said they would cast a white boy as the hero, compared to only 19% who would cast a black boy, and only 12% would cast an Asian child. When you think about the amount of media that kids consume and what this means, we know that we have a huge opportunity as well as a responsibility as members of the media industry. The other piece, the third takeaway that I want to leave with you, is with regard to the future. We asked them to think about what would happen in the future, where they would place certain events. They expect travel to Mars and a cure for cancer before racial equality. And so we knew that we needed to not just stop here, but dig more deeply into understanding what these conversations around race were like, how they were taking place, what was being said and how we could better support them. So Colleen, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, as we were doing the study, we thought, what if we could be a fly in the wall to hear how these conversations were actually taking place in homes? And we designed a study that let us do that as closely as possible over Zoom, where we gave families, we started with white and black families because that's where we saw the biggest differences in both experiences of racism but also perceptions. We later did the study with Hispanic and Asian families as well. To start, we had children ages 5 to 10. And what we did is we gave the parent and child 8 scenarios to discuss. And we said these were all scenarios of racism. We labeled it as such. And they varied from very explicit situations, such as a girl not being invited to a birthday party because the white birthday girl didn't want any black kids at her party. These are so hard to hear, but these are real. These were created by our team of expert advisors and all of our team members who were, for the study black and had these experiences that happened to them. So this was very personal for everyone on the team. And also more implicit situations such as, the products that a black mom and daughter are looking for at a store are locked up, the hair products, but for the white family, they're not locked up. Or, for example, a black mom and daughter being followed in a store by a security guard and their bag is checked when they leave, but not the white child and parent. So we had these different situations, and we just kind of threw them in the deep end, and we said, just talk about it. How would you naturally discuss the situation with your child? As you can imagine, the results were fascinating, but we also followed this up with an in-depth interview with the parent afterwards. In these discussions, we heard heartbreaking things like, not dissimilar to Makeda's daughter Journey, kids talking about wanting to change, black kids talking about wanting to change the color of their skin. Or one mom was saying that her daughter, who was not mixed race, she was black, but she would lie and say that she was mixed race because she thought she would be better liked and accepted that way. We had black parents telling us how frustrated they were. They said, when will this change? Animals are treated with more respect than we are. We also saw white kids confused because, they didn't notice these situations happening. And this one incredible, moment between a white son and his mother, it was about the hair scenario where the hair products, for the black families were, behind a shelf. And he was like, what? Why is this happening? Why are they locked up behind a gate? This isn't fair. This isn't right. And the mother saying, yes, it's true. I've noticed it before, and I'll point it out to you next time. But she's saying, you don't notice this because you don't have to notice this. It doesn't affect you. And this is the common theme that we had come up is that, these white families have the luxury of not having to have these discussions. We also did a really amazing in-depth analysis with UCLA looking at the language that was used. Some amazing graduate students there. And we coded everything that was said during the parent-child talks and also the parent interview with us. I also want to mention that we always made sure the moderator matched the race of the parent to make sure that they felt as comfortable as possible opening up with us. And you saw in the video, one of the findings was that white families were more likely to use color evasive language, such as we don't see race, we don't see color. But we also saw that they described the situations as mean, rude, and not nice, whereas the black families described the scenarios as racist. So, if we want to end racism, we have to not be afraid to say the word and call it out when we see it. And we need to be able to see it. And a lot of times white families are just not seeing it because it doesn't impact them. And when we talk to white families about, the barriers of having these discussions, it's not that they don't want to help. They want to have everyone live in a fair world and an equal world. They want that, but they don't want to break their kids' innocence. They also, don't want to get it wrong or make things worse. They say, I don't want to plant a seed to make my kid think that way. And so what came out is that parents need help and guidance in having these conversations in age-appropriate ways. So it wasn't just white families, though, that needed help.
Right. We did some research, and we found on a scale of 1 to 5, how prepared did you feel to talk about these scenarios that Colleen mentioned with your child? On average, both white and black families rated the same, 2.4, which told us that every parent, regardless of your background, needs support in talking about this difficult topic. Colleen mentioned there was a difference in words, and we began to code that, but we also really wanted to hone in on the talk, because we know that the talk is happening in some homes, and it's not necessarily born out of a desire to have these deep conversations, but born out of necessity. And so 8 out of 10 Black and Hispanic families are having this conversation by the time their child is 10 years old, 7 in 10 Asian families. For some, it's not just about societal issues, it's really about that, plus the need to have your child come home alive.
Yeah. So we created a guide because, we couldn't just do this research and see this big need and do nothing about it. And so with our amazing team at Noggin and Sparkler Learning and Paramount's Content for Change, we just released a guide, which you'll have bookmarks passed out to you by the amazing Julia Levy with a QR code. But this guide was really, and part of my inspiration for starting this research in the first place with Makeda, you heard Makeda's inspiration, but for me, after George Floyd's murder, I saw, news story after news story saying, talk to your kids about race and racism. No age is too young. At the time, I had a 1- and 2-year-old, so I took that advice very seriously. But every article I read didn't have any concrete advice on how to have that conversation. The best resources I could find were Sesame, which are great, but still, I wanted someone to hold my hand through that conversation. And I thought, if I'm confused and I have a PhD in child development, I think probably a lot of people are very confused, and that's what we found. And so that's what I really wanted this guide to be as, someone holding your hand through it and not just saying don't shush your kids when they say something awkward in public. We've all had those moments. But then what do you say? If you can't just tell them don't shush them, well, what do you say instead? And so our guide has these, if your kid says this, here's what you could say, these suggested things. And throughout the guide, it focuses a lot on similarities and differences. And let's celebrate our differences. And let's also point out our similarities. And we constantly are giving parents things that they can say because we know that parents are exhausted. We wanted to eliminate as many barriers as possible in having this conversation. And so the guide's been terrific, but we quickly had teachers saying, we want this in our classroom. So the team at Sparkler Learning created a teacher version, and the teachers so far have been loving this. We'd love to have you check it out and get your feedback as well.
So what we can kind of see here is what was articulated was the need, right? And as in the words that you've put forth is the devaluation, right? That kids feel it. We saw that video. There's this articulation of the research and the need. But I also heard within that a call to content creators. And so we're very lucky to have a very prolific content creator on stage, meaning that you have helped to produce so much of literally the backbeat of our lives. And I'm really curious, Darryl, if you want to speak a little bit about what belonging means to you.
First of all, belonging means being accepted as you are. That's the most important thing. Another thing I want to quickly add, though, is, the Asians and the Black people are kind of in the same area. But this is funny. When we was growing up, most of because you said it was school and movies and TV, where when we was growing up, we only saw Black people as pimps and pushers, drug pushers. And we only saw movies like Superfly and Shaft and Hell Up in Harlem and Foxy Brown and Pam Grier and all of that. So it was always in a negative connotation. But in the 70s, hip-hop did something very unique. It gave people of color power. And it wasn't just because you was in a gang or you was coming up in the ghetto as individuals in the ghetto not doing the stuff that the perception media and TV was giving that ghetto people do. And these breakdancers were dancers. These graffiti artists were artists. Like, when we wasn't getting no money, but for, graffiti was wrong because we was writing on walls we didn't know because nobody was giving us canvases. But we had to get the art out of us. And it took somebody who knew art, who said, stop throwing these Black boys and girls in jail. This is art. So that did something for us. And then with the music made us producers and composers, and the rap made us poets. But we still didn't have a representation that was comparable to what was on TV and what was in the movies, and even what was in the books. We didn't have our George Washingtons and Tom Sawyers and stuff like that. But one of the heroes before hip hop put us actually to be there, was a young man named Bruce Lee, an Asian, who was like a superhero. And for us black and Puerto Rican kids, the black and brown kids in New York cities and probably in all other ghettos across the world, he was a hero to us. So that's why I said, first and foremost, coming as you are, because then you could find the beauty in that. Now, for me, race was kind of weird because I'm darker now. If you look at pictures of me when I'm little, my skin is light. So even in my neighborhood, I was called white boy. I was called white boy. And hold on, it didn't end there because, you know, when I got out of school, the first thing you see on TV is the Brady Bunch and shows like that. You know what I'm saying? And I was fortunate to have, not lucky, I was fortunate to have my mother and father, both parents in the house. They both had jobs. My father had the electric 225. He didn't have the Fleetwood and the Brougham. The Buick was the poor man's Cadillac, but it was still up in there. It looked like they were. But, you know, those kids would always call me, you like a white family. And the reason why they would do that, I was a straight A student. I was a straight A student, always on an honor roll. I was a kid that had to be in the house all the time. So what I'm trying to say is, even in my own neighborhood, I had the characteristics or that perception that even the kids in my neighborhood thought that was the way it was supposed to be, until this thing called hip hop came along to change that perception, because it's doing what they're doing. It's doing what y'all doing, is starting dialogue in a way that you don't have to be afraid or cautious to talk about it. We have a habit with our children, if the child is that's young, but they do it. 1, 2, and 3 years old, 4 years old. They'll say something very wise. And we'll tell them as adults, don't say that, you're too young to say that. You're holding back development. We as adults are holding back the change because the kids are paying attention. They need to have those conversations. So for us, what made it easy for us was language, literature, and art. And it made it easier for us to have those conversations. Now, when it comes to me, basically how me and my partners in the group and everybody before us that inspired us to do it, when we came along, there was all this division because there was a lot of misunderstanding. And Run DMC, when we came along, before Run DMC, it was just hip-hop was considered black ghetto music because it was all the message and how messed up things was. But Run DMC, coming from the suburbs, we had a different outlook about things. Now, we rapped about a lot of things we didn't have. We wanted those things, but just by talking about them, we was able to get them. But what Run DMC basically did is what y'all are doing with this. First of all, I see discussing race. You're having a discussion. So we started talking about it. But then you put the ideas and the subject, the content. Yeah, I'm a content creator. You put the content to where everybody can view it, which makes having those conversations easier. I've been to South Africa. I haven't been to South Africa. I've been to South Sudan, which was crazy. But it was beautiful to people. I've been to Russia, I've been to Ukraine and all of that. Since 1983, everywhere that I go, people say this. When Steven Tyler took that mic stand in that Walk This Way video and knocked down the wall that was separating y'all, it didn't just happen in the video, it happened in the world. So it's not just happening in the app and stuff like that. It's made available so that we all can partake of it and have those discussions. And the beautiful thing about it, whether it's Run DMC records, it's like that, and that's the way it is. Like, I was so gangster without being gangster, because gangsters, what do they rhyme about? Drugs and guns and sex and all of that stuff. I rhymed about school. I'm DMC, in the place to be. I go to St. John's University. And since kindergarten, I acquired the knowledge. After 12th grade, I made it cool and acceptable. So as a content creator, it's like Makeda said, it's our responsibility to have these discussions. What they're doing is helping you with your responsibility, because whether you like it or not, you gotta have them. So content was key to allow Run DMC and the culture of hip hop and everybody else that was like me, whether you was an artist, a dancer, a director, a writer, a poet, and stuff like that. Discussion, words, dialogue, and literature, and presentations and productions helps everybody out to have the discussions that they should be having. And if we don't do it this way, nobody's gonna do it. So that's the beautiful thing about it.
Thank you so much for speaking to that. And Akimi, I'm going to have you take us home, because there were some of the things that I heard you lift up about how important it is that we actually see, to see it and to discuss it. And I've heard you speak about and demonstrate in so many different and creative ways the role of authentic representation, representation that you spoke about. Can you tell us a little bit about how that shows up and what we see in the world that you construct for kids?
Sure, and I'm going to go to the same home that you just brought up. So I'm going to go to 1969, right, which was the War on Poverty. Some of you don't remember it, so I'll just take you there. Some of you weren't there, so I'll just bring us back.
Yes, bring it back.
It was a seminal time in our country's history, and that time was the War on Poverty. It was also the movement of the Civil Rights Movement, and it was the onset of the Head Start project, right? So it was a critical time, and it was one other thing that joined that was Sesame Street. Yep. Right? And Sesame Street was gritty New York and said, we're just going to mirror back what we see. And so that notion of authentically inclusive representation was key, just to your point. And then you have to think about that content as service and what you're messaging out. And the part that I kind of want to circle back around to here is the notion that everybody loses in this thing. No one is benefiting from it. And that's the other fallacy, that there's somehow, we don't even use the term privilege. There is no privilege. It's a construct based upon subjugating others and for sake of a power structure that only benefits a very, very few. We're all losing to this. And so whether we talk about it through color lines, which Sesame has chosen not to. Sesame has chosen to think about this less about children of color and more about people of color, more about people of culture, because culture is what we have in common. And that we've hit this milestone, and I'll come around to it, but they impassioned me. Can I say you? So it's just, okay. Yeah. So it's challenging, right? And so there's this notion that we finally hit as a country, so let's just keep it honest as you have beckoned us forward here, Darryl, is that we hit this milestone that was fear-based milestone of becoming a dominant culture of color. That's what happened. And so we can understand that all of these other constructs are in place to make sure that folks get it. And we're talking about cultures that have been erased from any depiction. Talk about the indigenous people of this country not being seen anywhere. Talking about us using monolithic terms to describe such a diversity in diaspora of all people, right? That folks all of a sudden are clustered in, and my experience as a black Japanese person has to be the same as everybody else's, right? So the commonality is if we all accept this individualism for sake of joining and helping one another, then to your point, we're all seen, right? And that's what children want. They want to be seen. I see you, you see me. And the power we're talking about is voice. And let's name it and give it, because they have these concepts and they don't know what to do with these concepts, right? So what do we find in fourth grade? They're acting it out. Right? We see the dramatic play corner inside early childhood. They are role-playing, and I'm tearing from your child. We're role-playing, and they're trying to tell us, this is what I see, and this is what it is. And in some regards, you know how gritty Sesame Street likes to be, that it's not, we have to be more explicit and bold. We have to tell the truth and let them speak their truth.
Right.
Right? We have to, and it's hard. Right? And because whether we want to go home and paint that sanctuary or not, kids get it. Once I step through that threshold, we're all in threat. We're all in threat. Nobody is safe. And so if anything from all of this, why we need to discuss race, ethnicity, and culture with all children is because they are all curious about the same thing. Yeah. And that's the developmental side of it, right?
Yes. Yep. So as we only have about a minute to wrap up, I don't know if other folks have a minute that they want to. We have 3? So
2, 3.
we're being told we have a minute 31. So, I mean, so are there other things that y'all want to say? I mean, there's a lot of stuff I'm sure that we can, but I had any thoughts that people want to end with?
Well, just to go off of Akimi there, it's true that, kids notice race and notice differences. And we think this is a bad thing, but this is developmentally expected.
Yes.
And so I think it's just to take that approach of, let's make sure that they don't, hurt anyone's feelings with this. Like, because there's certain things that will hurt other kids. Yep. And so I think that's part of what this guide is intended to do, right? Is say they're going to naturally notice these things. Let's get ahead of it. Let's not wait until this becomes a problem. Let's make sure that they understand that the differences are to be celebrated. This is wonderful that we're all different, and rather than be afraid of it. And that comes back to the whole idea of avoiding this conversation and avoiding this suggests that there's something wrong about it. Saying that we don't see color, well, that's weird. We don't see differences. Like that's not accurate.
Dehumanizing.
It's dehumanizing, and it's suggesting that there's something wrong with that. Otherwise, why are we afraid of seeing this? So I think just for teachers and school boards and parents who are hesitant to dive into this topic, it's to me getting ahead of this before it becomes an issue, because it will happen. And if you ask any school board, ask any teacher, this happens. And so we really just want to figure out what can we do differently today so that we lessen this problem in the future. And we won't stop doing this work until racism doesn't exist.
Allison, I'm not sure that people know that Darryl debuted a new song last night. So you might
Oh, the believe, yes. That's because of you. I'm with here. So I have a great team here, and we're just trying to be informative and innovative and creative. And that's what education needs. Education and conversation needs innovation so that we can have a transformation to have a unified nation. Hey, that was a great rap.
Yes.
See, it's a natural progression. And it's good that you were saying these kids just want to be seen. When Run DMC came along, every white Jewish kid said, I can be seen now. The Beastie Boys, and you look at Eminem, but we gave it to them in a way where they could. The Beastie Boys are great because they wasn't white Jewish kids trying to be black rappers. Yo, what's up? This and that. They were white kids rapping about who they were. That's right. And I remember when we first started doing the tours, it was a little nervous for us because we in the deep black South. We in Alabama, we in New Orleans, and they were the opener. This is 1986. Run DMC, Beasties, LL Cool J, and Houdini, and the Beasties were the opener. So the first couple of shows, we was like, we stay in the dressing room. Because we didn't know. We had no idea, but they would go out, and in the first seconds of the show, you would hear the crowd. They was getting applause. Why? Because real recognizes real.
Thank you.
We hope that what you've heard today is a call to action, that you are equipped with a literal soundtrack, tools, and mechanism of doing so. And we also know that this is happening at a time when there is an active force against these conversations. We know that teachers are telling us that they are scared to have these conversations. So again, our role here as people who love children and have hope for the future is that this is a call to action. So we hope that you have been inspired, moved, that you're going to move a little bit and find these opportunities to bring this work, this inspiration, these songs back to the children that you serve and love. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.